All right, so are you ready to get a little uncomfortable? I mean, you all requested we dig into how the U.S. economic system is
Yeah.
impacting young people,
Yeah.
and it's one of those topics that can be a little anxiety-inducing for everybody.
Yeah, definitely.
But Scott Galloway, the NYU professor,
Hmm.
who's known for kind of not holding back when
Yeah.
it comes to his opinions on business and society,
Hmm.
he's tackling this head-on in his TED Talk, and we are too.
Well, and he starts by posing this really powerful question right out of the gate,
Yeah.
almost like a challenge. Do we as a society truly love our children?
Ooh.
It's heavy stuff. It sets the stage for a pretty intense look at how our choices as a society are
Yeah.
shaping the future for the next generation.
Yeah, and he doesn't waste any time getting right to it. Like, his central argument is that younger generations
Hmm.
are actually facing a decline in prosperity
Right.
compared to their parents and grandparents.
Yeah.
And he's not just talking about, like, feeling broke after a weekend out.
Yeah.
He's talking about real, like, fundamental economic shifts.
Exactly. He's backing it up with some serious data,
Yeah.
hard numbers.
Okay, so give us some of the highlights.
Well, one of the things that really jumped out at me is when he talks about how earnings, when you adjust for inflation, are actually lower for young people
Oh, yeah.
today than they were for previous generations.
Well,
And then at the same time, you have the things that used to be like markers of success, like
right.
owning a home, getting a good education.
Yeah.
Those are becoming more and more expensive, almost impossible for a lot of people to achieve.
Yeah, it's like the whole picture of the American dream,
Yeah.
working hard, buying a house, having a family. It feels like it's slipping away.
Fading.
For a
Yeah.
lot of young people. I mean, what does that do to society when that promise starts to feel broken?
Well, that's exactly what Galloway is getting at.
Yeah.
He says this isn't just some like random blip. This is a fundamental breakdown of the social contract.
Right.
That idea that each generation is going to do better than the last, it's being seriously challenged. Mm-hmm.
And he even suggests that this could lead to, and this is a scary thought, like real social and political unrest.
Ooh, that's a scary thought. Yeah.
If people feel like the system is rigged against them,
Yeah.
it can have pretty serious consequences.
He uses a really interesting example to kind of illustrate this whole point. He talks about the minimum wage.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, think about this. He throws out this number. He says if the minimum wage had kept pace with productivity gains,
Right.
it would be around $23 an hour today.
Which is mind-blowing when you think about it.
More than double what it is in most places.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine what kind of impact that would have on your life if you were working a minimum wage job and suddenly you were making $23 an hour.
I mean, it would be life-changing for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And, he's using this to really make us think about how we value young people's work.
Mm-hmm.
And then he connects this directly to the issue of housing.
Okay.
He's saying, the skyrocketing home prices we're seeing.
Yeah. They're not just the result of like a natural market cycle. They're being driven, at least in part, by people who already own homes, who are using their political power to actually restrict new housing development to keep prices high
Right.
and protect their own investments.
He actually uses this phrase, he calls it weaponizing government.
Yeah, that's a strong statement.
Yeah, pretty intense.
It's definitely provocative, but it makes you think about the power dynamics at play here, right? He's basically saying that those who benefit from the current system
Yeah.
are actively working to keep it that way, even if it means screwing over the next generation.
It's kind of ruthless when you think about it that way.
It is.
Yeah.
And the result is, he points out that pre-pandemic, the average mortgage payment was $1,100.
Okay.
And now it's a whopping $2,300.
Oh my gosh.
That's a huge jump.
That's a huge jump.
And it really illustrates the impact of these policies.
And that kind of feeds right into his larger argument about this massive wealth transfer that's happening from younger to older generations.
Right. He's not just making this up. He's got the stats to back it up.
Yeah.
He points to data showing that people over 70 now control a way bigger share of household income compared to those under 40.
That makes sense, yeah.
And it's not just because they've had more time to save.
Right.
He's arguing that this is a direct result of policies that favor older, wealthier demographics.
And then he throws this curveball, this whole thing about higher education and how it's basically become a luxury brand.
He goes right for the jugular with this one. He compares universities to like high-end fashion houses like LVMH.
What?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
He's saying they're deliberately limiting the number of students they accept to drive up prices.
Interesting.
Just like those luxury brands,
Wow. Yeah.
creating this sense of scarcity and exclusivity.
Okay, I'm following.
And it's not just about keeping the riffraff out.
Right.
It's also about maximizing profits.
Yeah.
You know, he even uses his own experience as an example. He tells the story about how he got into UCLA,
Yeah.
get this, a 2.23 GPA.
What?
And back then, the acceptance rate was 76%.
Wow.
Now it's a measly 9%.
Like the Hunger Games or something.
It's insane. So not only are the standards way higher,
Right?
but the cost of tuition has also skyrocketed.
So it makes you wonder, right? Is college really about providing opportunity anymore? Or is it more about protecting its own prestige and, frankly, the salaries of the people who work there?
Yeah, it's a tough question.
And, of course, it's not just about universities, right?
No.
He sees this as part of a larger trend where institutions are increasingly serving the needs of the wealthy
Right.
at the expense of everyone else.
And this ties right back to his main argument about wealth transfer.
Yeah.
With young people essentially footing the bill.
For a system that's increasingly rigged against them.
Exactly.
It's a pretty bleak picture, I gotta say.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
But he doesn't stop there. He then moves on to the whole issue of corporate profits versus wages.
It's like he's building this case piece by piece,
Yeah.
showing how all these different factors are contributing to this growing sense of inequality.
So what's he saying about corporate profits and wages?
Well, he uses this really powerful visual in his talk, a graph.
Okay.
It shows corporate profits just shooting up like a rocket,
Well, I can imagine.
while wages stay basically flat.
Oof. Yeah.
It's this stark visualization of how the balance of power has shifted.
It's a powerful image.
It really drives home the point that something's out of whack.
Yeah.
And he argues that over the last 40 years, we've seen this dramatic shift in favor of capital, with workers getting a smaller and smaller piece of the pie.
So it's like this fundamental shift in the relationship between capital and labor.
Yeah,
And it's not working in favor of the workers.
not at all.
And it's young people who are bearing the brunt of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're the ones entering the workforce facing these conditions.
Right. It's like a whole system that seems stacked against them.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is. It's heavy but important.
Yep.
So we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to delve into some even more controversial topics,
Buckle up.
like Social Security and the role of the pandemic in all of this.
This is where things get really interesting. Okay, so we're back and ready to dive into some more of Galloway's, shall we say, provocative ideas.
Yeah, he doesn't shy away from controversy, does he?
Not at all. So where do we even begin? Oh, Social Security.
Ooh, yeah, that's a big one.
You know, to understand his take on Social Security, it's helpful to remember how it was originally designed.
Yeah.
Like, what was its original purpose?
Yeah, remind us.
So it was created to be a safety net for elderly Americans, you know, to make sure that after working their whole lives, they
Yeah.
wouldn't end up destitute in retirement.
Okay.
It was this kind of like intergenerational agreement, right? Where working people contribute to the system knowing that it'll be there to support them when they get older.
Okay, so that's the ideal, the way it's supposed to work, but
But as Galloway points out, things have gotten a lot more complicated.
I can imagine, yeah.
We've got people living longer.
Right.
We've got the huge baby boomer generation entering retirement.
Yeah.
And all of that puts a massive strain on the system's finances.
Oh, yeah, it's like a ticking time bomb that everyone's been talking about for decades.
Exactly. And Galloway's argument is that in its current form, Social Security is basically a massive wealth transfer from younger generations to older, wealthier ones.
Well, okay, hold on. He actually uses the term intergenerational theft,
Yeah, he's not pulling any punches.
which is like a pretty loaded term, right?
Yeah, it's strong language for sure.
Okay, so, I mean, it's provocative, but it does make you think about, you know, is the system sustainable in the long run?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
And Galloway suggests that we need to consider some pretty radical changes.
Like what?
Well, one idea he throws out there is means testing for Social Security benefits.
Oh, okay. So, like, basically, if you're wealthy,
Exactly.
you might receive less support.
Right. It wouldn't be this one-size-fits-all approach anymore.
That's a big change from how it works now.
It is. It's controversial.
Yeah,
But, you know, it highlights the tough choices we have to make as a society.
Right.
When we're trying to balance the needs of different generations.
Yeah, because we're not all in the same boat financially, are we?
Nope.
Okay.
And then, of course, you can't talk about intergenerational wealth without talking about the elephant in the room.
The pandemic.
The pandemic. Exactly.
Yeah, it kind of threw everything up in the air, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And Galloway argues that it actually worsened the wealth gap in ways that we're still trying to fully understand.
It's like it magnified all the existing problems, right?
Totally. He points out that the government's response to the pandemic, things like stimulus checks, loan forgiveness programs,
Right.
were obviously necessary to prevent a total economic collapse.
Yeah. No one wants to see breadlines again.
But they also had some unintended consequences.
Okay, like what?
Well, for one thing, they contributed to rising inflation.
Right, which hurts everyone, but especially people who are already struggling to make ends meet.
Exactly. And then there's the fact that those who are already wealthy
Yeah.
often ended up benefiting the most from those programs.
So that whole Matthew effect, right?
Yeah.
The rich get richer.
Yeah. Sadly, it often plays out that way.
Okay, so it sounds like Galloway's saying that while we had to take those actions, it kind of made the problem worse in some ways.
Yeah, it's a nuanced point.
Right.
He's not saying those measures were wrong,
Right.
but he's pointing out how they might have accidentally made existing inequalities even worse.
It's almost like we were trying to put out a fire with a giant hose. But in the process, we accidentally flooded some neighborhoods more than others.
Exactly.
And it's the younger generation, the ones who are already facing an uphill battle, who are left to deal with the mess.
It's a tough situation all around, and to make matters even more complicated.
Oh, there's more.
Oh, yeah. We haven't even gotten to what Galloway sees as a growing mental health crisis among young people.
Yeah, I was wondering when we were going to get to that.
He doesn't hold back on this topic either.
So what's his take?
He throws out some pretty disturbing statistics
About
the rise in self-harm, depression, anxiety among young people.
Yeah, that's something I've been hearing a lot about.
And he doesn't hesitate to point the finger, at least in part, at social media.
Oh, yeah, that's the other big elephant in the room, right?
He's particularly critical of platforms like Facebook and Instagram. He argues that they're intentionally designed to be addictive.
Really?
Yeah, he says they exploit vulnerabilities in our brains
Wow.
to keep us hooked and scrolling and liking and sharing.
I can see that.
He even compares it to allowing an adversary to implant a neural jack into our youth.
Wow. That's a pretty intense image.
Yeah, it's meant to be provocative.
So he's saying that we're basically handing our kids over to these tech giants who are making money off their attention and potentially harming their mental health.
It's a disturbing thought for sure.
Yeah.
And when you combine that with all the economic pressures we've been discussing.
Yeah, lack of affordable housing, rising education costs, stagnant wages.
Exactly. It's no wonder that so many young people are feeling overwhelmed.
Right, like hopeless even.
Yeah. Like no matter how hard they work, they just can't get ahead.
So it's like this perfect storm of economic hardship, social pressure, and constant bombardment from social media.
Right, and it's a lot for anyone to handle, let alone young people who are still trying to figure out who they are and what their place is in the world.
It's a lot to process. But we're not going to leave you hanging with all this doom and gloom. When we come back, we're going to dig into some of the solutions that Galloway proposes.
Because he actually does offer some hope.
Okay, good, because I need some hope right now.
He lays out a pretty bold agenda for how we can start to address these issues and create a more just and equitable future for everyone.
All right, well, let's take another quick break and then we'll get into those solutions. All right, so we've talked about the problems, the challenges that young people are facing. It's a lot to take in, kind of depressing, honestly. But I'm really hoping that Galloway doesn't just leave us hanging here. Does he offer any solutions?
Yeah, he actually does. And they're pretty bold. Some might even say radical.
Okay, so give me the highlights. What does he propose we actually do about all this?
Well, he starts with addressing the economic issues head on, like those bread and butter concerns that we've been talking about.
Okay, like what specifically? What kind of levers does he think we can pull?
Well, one of the key things he talks about is increasing the minimum wage, making sure it keeps pace with the actual cost of living.
Okay, so not just these tiny incremental increases.
Yeah, exactly, like a real living wage.
Yeah, makes sense, yeah.
He also argues for a more progressive tax structure, one where the wealthiest Americans pay a larger share.
Yeah, I can see why he'd suggest that. It's definitely going to be controversial.
Oh, absolutely.
But if we're talking about like redistributing wealth, it seems like a pretty direct way to do it.
Yeah, it's addressing the issue at its core.
Right.
And he's also a big proponent of investing heavily in areas like childcare and education.
Yeah, especially early childhood education. That makes a huge difference, right?
Absolutely. It's about setting kids up for success from the start.
And it also helps families afford to, actually have kids.
Exactly. It's like a win-win.
Right.
And speaking of big, potentially controversial changes.
Oh, there's more.
Yeah, he doesn't let Social Security off the hook.
Oh, yeah. That's always a hot-button topic. I'm almost afraid to ask, but what's his solution there?
Well, he suggests that we need to at least explore options like means testing.
Oh, right. So that idea we talked about earlier,
Yeah.
where if you have more wealth,
Mm-hmm.
you might receive less in Social Security benefits.
Exactly. It's about making sure that the system is actually providing support to those who need it the most.
Okay, so again, a pretty significant departure from how things work now.
Yeah, for sure.
I can see why that would spark a lot of debate.
Oh, absolutely. But he's really challenging us to think outside the box here.
Yeah, and I mean, these are the kinds of conversations we need to be having if we're serious about addressing these problems.
Totally. And then maybe his most controversial idea, and he saves this one for last.
Okay, wait on me.
He calls for breaking up big tech companies
Whoa, okay.
and implementing much stricter regulations on social media.
Especially when it comes to protecting young users,
Yes,
right?
exactly. He's not messing around with this one. He sees the power that these companies have, the influence they wield,
Especially over young people.
and he's deeply concerned about the potential consequences.
So he's advocating for some pretty radical interventions.
Yeah, bold moves.
But what strikes me is that he's not presenting these as like pie-in-the-sky ideas. He genuinely believes we can do this.
Mm-hmm. That's what's so inspiring about him.
Yeah, he's like, this is possible, folks. We just got to, like, get our act together.
Right, it's not a question of can we do it, it's a question of will we do it.
Yeah. So it all comes down to political will.
And ultimately to our values as a society.
Oh, that reminds me. He brings it back to that question he asked at the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
Do we love our children?
It's such a powerful way to frame it. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about economics or policy.
It's about, like, what kind of world we want to create.
Exactly. For ourselves and for future generations.
Yeah. Are we willing to make the sacrifices?
Yeah.
To put in the effort to build a more just and equitable world for our kids?
It's a tough question, but it's the question we all have to grapple with.
He ends his talk with this really moving image where he's describing how when you become a parent, your whole world shifts. Like everything revolves around the well-being of your child.
It's a beautiful image.
Yeah, it really brings it home. Like these aren't just abstract political debates.
These are real lives, real futures at stake.
Right. And while he focused on the U.S., I keep thinking, are these same issues happening everywhere?
That's a great question. What about you? What unique pressures are you facing because of your age, your location, your own circumstances? Share your thoughts with us on social media. Let's keep this conversation going.
We'd love to hear from you. So learning is great, but it's just the first step, right?
Yeah, for sure.
The real power comes from taking action.
Totally. So what one thing, no matter how small, will you do differently after this deep dive?
Yeah, commit to something. Make a change in your own life, however small.
Even if it's just having a conversation with someone about these issues,
Yeah.
that's a start.
So thanks for joining us on this exploration of generational wealth transfer.
It's been a journey,
Yeah, it has. A heavy one.
but an important one.
Yeah, absolutely. Until next time, keep learning
Keep questioning
and keep pushing for a better future.
for all of us.